Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I'm your host as usual, and obviously, welcome back to the show. Today's episode 268 of the show, and before we get started, we're just going to do a little bit of house cleaning here because it only makes sense that we do it. So let's get on with the house cleaning. I do want to say thank you guys for coming back and listening. It does mean a lot to me. You guys constantly take time of days to download episodes, to share these episodes, to constantly keep letting me know how you feel, whether you like my stupid face or not, or my opinions or not. At the end of the day, I greatly appreciate you, and I greatly appreciate you guys actually coming back and listening to me, because let's be real, it'd be kind of weird if I was just sitting here talking to myself and, again, no one to talk to, and I was literally just talking to myself. This would be wildly depressing, I'm not going to lie to you. But I really do appreciate it. But today, well, aside from that, I do also want to give a little bit of shout out to the Patreon backers as well. If you're supporting the show on Patreon, same thing also goes for the lovely peeps that are just downloading and sharing these episodes all over the place, because again, you guys are greatly appreciated. But on to today's episode, because as we alluded to last week, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, again, highly do recommend that you go check out last week's episode. That was 267. But this week, in this already crazy packed week of so many things happening, whether it be, things that maybe not directly correlated to the video game industry, like, for example, the passing of Akira Toriyama, an icon, the legend. Without him, a lot of manga, a lot of anime, a lot of things that took inspiration from Dragon Ball or even from the creative mind of Akira Toriyama. And realistically, a lot of the creative medium as a whole, TV, movies, and stuff like that, really wouldn't exist without him. So RIP the icon, the legend. And, sad. It's tragic, especially at the age of 68. That's, very big news that happened. But the other thing we're going to be talking about is the possible collapse of the video game industry. And before we get started, we do want to preference this, that while there is a lot of speculation, nothing is guaranteed. There are certain patterns, there are certain trends that we should be paying attention to when it comes to something like this. Because if you guys are maybe not that familiar, there was a video game crash that happened before. If you don't believe me, it's just, heck, just for example, I'll do it right now. Video game crash on Google, and you'll see what happened. And it basically brings up, the one that happened in 1977, the one that happened in 1983, that these were the video game crashes, the large-scale recession that happened in the video game industry that took place both in the 70s and the 80s, so it happened twice. And right now, we are currently looking at a interesting time for the video game industry, because let's be honest here, guys, if you haven't been paying attention, let me just refresh your memory or even give you some more context of the situation and why we're even talking about this today. So let's turn the clock backwards and go back to 2023. When we look at 2023, it was even stated, this has been documented multiple times, multiple sources, multiple people talked about this in real time while it was happening. But throughout 2023, over 10,000 jobs were lost in the video game industry. And people thought it couldn't get any much worse, can it? Well, fast forward to 3 months into the 2024, the new year, we are currently at over 8,000 total jobs that have been lost in just a span of 3 months. Not even a fourth of the way into the year, and we have already reached 4/5 of what it was last year? And you see how concerning that is and why a lot of people are starting to worry. And yes, some people can say, you could look at things like, a lot of mergers took place, so there was a lot of redundant roles, so it only makes sense. But we're also starting to see a trend in the industry that hasn't been seen before, in the sense that One, budgets for video games are starting to rise. If you don't believe me, you can look at the whole court case that happened with Microsoft, Sony, when it came to the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. You saw things like budgets of video games ballooning out of proportions, 180 million, 200 million, 300 million to make some of these games, whether it be Horizon, Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, Spider-Man 2. You start to see how the budgets of these video games are getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Same thing with games like Skull and Bones that, maybe not so successful. Budgets with games like the Suicide Squad, and you see these budgets of video games just start to creepily go up. And it's concerning because at the same time, you start to see how Sony announced in their recent financial report that their return on investment or their growth or their profit margins in this case was only 6%, which was actually decreased from the years prior. And so this is all caused, well, they even mentioned it a little bit too, so we're not going to pin it all on this one very specific thing. But they did mention that a possible factor that attributed to this was the increasing cost of video games. This is why they started taking actions like raising the price of their console, or maybe even raising the price of their video games up to $70. Like starting to make some of these moves to help justify the price that they're spending, because let's be realistic, that's a lot of money to spend on a game that could succeed, could not succeed, especially with some of these single player games that Sony is known for, that they don't necessarily have that monetization style of a free to play game, or even a game like Fortnite or things like that, like a game that is designed to generate revenue, that yes, you are putting it out there for free, but you're putting out content, microtransactions, things like that help you generate revenue, like basically how Fortnite makes all their money. The game is free, you can play it for free, you don't have to spend a dime on it, but clearly a lot of people do because they buy the battle passes, they buy skins, they buy the music packs, they buy XYZ. You get what I'm saying? So the fact that we're starting to see some of these budgets balloon out of proportion is not necessarily helping the case. Because look at this, like some of the layoffs that recently happened to Insomniac. And if you guys aren't familiar, Insomniac are the people that made the new Ratchet and Clank game that came out. They made Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, wildly successful games. And it was one of those things where there was a lot of concern. The fact that, well, this game was incredibly successful and they got people laid off. And that's concerning. Now, fast forward to companies like Microsoft, because let's be realistic, they're not safe from this. Microsoft had to lay off a couple people as well. And I say a couple, but it was a lot of people. And then you fast forward to this year, let's see. Let's look at this year. You had Unity, Twitch, Playtika, Discord, each company announcing layoffs from 1,800, 500, 400, 170 jobs. Fast forward to Riot Games laying off 11% of the company's workforce, about 530 people. Microsoft doing the same thing, about laying off 1,900 people. You have, Eidos Montreal laid off 97 staff members and shut down some of their games. Sony laid off 900 people from theirs. EA laid off 670. And the list can go on and on and on and on. And it's just like, we've already hit over 8,000 people losing their jobs. And some people are now worried, does this mean that we are going to see another crash of the video game industry? Are we going to see another recession? Because people look at the world economy, they see concerns or even rising concerns of inflation, rising concerns of a possible recession and things like that. And obviously I don't have the pedigree or even the knowledge to speak on something like those, but when we're looking at the video game space, it's very interesting because yes, there is a lot of people losing their jobs. A lot of games are being shut down. A lot of companies are being very conservative with what IPs they're wanting to invest in and what games they want to make. And we look at all this and it comes off as we're currently tracking towards a crash. Now, my own personal take, and I don't know, call me controversial, I don't necessarily think there's a crash, but I think it's more of a readjustment that needed to be done. And let me explain. Let's turn the clock back 4 years. What happened in the world in 2020? I don't think I necessarily have to say it, but for those that maybe you're not that aware of, yes, COVID happened and the world shut down. People were losing their jobs. People were staying at home. And during that process of people losing their jobs, or even more specifically, that part of people staying home and having that uncertainty of the world around them, people had more time to play video games. And whether you believe it or not, the video game industry saw a boom during that period of 2020, 2021, even a little bit of 2022. You started to see a boom because people were staying at home, so they needed something to do. So as a result, people started, buying video games. There's a reason why the Nintendo Switch blew up in sales like crazy. There's a reason why games like Animal Crossing did so well. There's a reason why, the next gen consoles, the Series X and the PS5 came out during that time period and, kind of sold out like crazy. Graphics cards were going on sale like crazy because obviously crypto mining was a big deal as well, but people were very interested in playing video games. Like the gaming industry saw a boom and more people were spending money on this hobby. And as a result, companies got very comfortable with an inflated budget, or in this case, inflated books, because people were spending more money. But now that the world has, gone back to a new normal, because we're not going to say it went back to normal, because if anything, a new normal has now been created, a new standard of doing things, living, because obviously things that happened in the past shape how we go forward. But we look at where society is now, and people are, back to going outside. People are more comfortable interacting with one another. Same thing, video games are still a big thing, but it's obviously not going to be as profitable as it was before, because now people have things to do. People can go outside. People can go to the gym. People can go to work, if they choose to go to work instead of working from home. And that's a whole different conversation. But the reality is things have changed. Same thing, even the economy. Most people don't necessarily have the same spending amount that they did before. They don't have the same budget, the same, income to debt ratio and things like that. Obviously money is a little bit tighter nowadays. So as a result, people aren't able to maybe spend as much as they want to. And same thing, also the pricing of certain things have increased because as we said, video games became more expensive. Consoles are starting to raise in price again. Instead of, decreasing like they should, they're starting to go up in certain markets. And same thing also goes, you start to see pieces of hardware for especially PCs are increasing in price. For example, the 40 series is very expensive in comparison to what the MSRP was for the 30 series, but that's nor here nor there. But the point stands. We start to see all of these factors line up, and as a result, during that time frame of the video game industry seeing a boom, obviously companies wanted money, so what they do? They hire more developers. They hire more people to work on these games, to pump them out faster, work on them so they can, generate these titles that will hopefully get someone to buy them. And we start to see the problem with that is when you start hiring during let's call it a bubble period, what happens when that bubble pops? You now are in the negative, you're overstaffed, and you got to figure out what to do to balance out your books so that your shareholders, your investors are happy. And so what happens, a lot of people end up losing their jobs as a result. And it's not because they did a bad job. It's not because they, weren't needed or wanted anymore, but it's just hey, as a business move, this is what we have to start doing to balance out the books. Now, granted, do I necessarily believe when CEOs say, we did everything we could, there was nothing we can do, so it's a sad day that we have to do this, but they're still taking home the same, if not more money every year, but that's nor here nor there. So if a CEO tells you that, I probably wouldn't necessarily believe them. I'd probably say they're full of crockett shit. But my point still stands, is there is a reason why this is all happening, and it mainly comes down to the return on investment. That's what companies are trying to do. This is why we've always said, companies are not your friend. Don't treat them like that. They will treat you as a number. That is just the facts of life. Companies will treat you like a number, so you have to be okay with that and not have some personal attachment to them, because again, they only see you as a number. It's not personal, it's just hardcore facts. But the point stands. We look at how the industry is now, and a lot of games are not selling well. Yes, there are games that are successful. For example, Spider-Man sold over 10 million copies. Mario Wonder sold so many. Tears of the Kingdom sold so many. Pokemon sold so many. You get what I mean? We're starting to see a lot of these games sell like crazy. But we're also seeing how some of these games that have large budgets aren't necessarily selling the way that they want them to. Like Final Fantasy 16, amazing game. I love Final Fantasy 16. I will die on that hill that this is one of my favorite Final Fantasies ever made. As Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth came out. However, we're starting to look at the physical sales and it's not looking promising. And the budgets for these games are going to be a little bit high, especially with what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish with them. So there are some concerns. Same thing goes, like we said, with Horizon Forbidden West. Budget was over 100 and something million. Spider-Man 200 million. Like, you got to mean, like, we're starting to see these budgets of these video games be super inflated. So obviously that means that the price that they charge for these video games and how many they have to sell to break even is going to be even higher. Now, games like Helldivers probably didn't take a lot of money to make, and it's selling like gangbusters. It's selling at $40, and, well, the game's extremely popular right now. But this does lead to that point that I mentioned earlier about the game industry trying to become more conservative with how they do things. And to be honest, I don't necessarily view this as a possible crash. Now, could it happen? Yes, realistically, like this could be a crash if we were to see a company, say like EA or Ubisoft or one of those major publishing, or even like say Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft just collapsed. You know what I mean? Like if that were to happen, then yeah, I think we're in a crash at this point. Then the video game industry is going to crash and burn. But I do believe that we are in a reconsolidation period where we're starting to, companies are starting to realize, okay, we need to reel in the workforce. We need to really keep who we need, release who we don't need, and then focus on making games that we know that will sell, but also maybe work towards not going too crazy with the AAA budgets and making these games extremely expensive. Because let's be realistic, games back in the day didn't necessarily need very large budgets, and they are some of the most widely regarded games of all time. You look at games like Halo 3, you look at the Gears 1 through 3, you look at games like Ratchet and Clank, like some of the first ones, Jak and Dexter, you look at some of the older, God of Wars. You got what I mean? Like you start to look at some of these older games that are beloved, that didn't necessarily have super budgets, but they were incredibly beautifully made games that are still remembered by people to this day. Like Transformers Fall of Cybertron, made by High Moon Studios, like is a very beloved game. Games like the Sonic games, like for example, like Sonic Generation, Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Adventure 1, 2, you got what I mean? Like you start to look at some of these games that were made in the past, and even for like Nintendo games, for Christ's sake, like none of these games had like super crazy budgets. Maybe at the time they were high, but in comparison to now, they didn't necessarily have those super inflated budgets, and they sold like gangbusters. And I think that's where there needs to be an adjustment period in the video game industry, is defining what is the AAA experience. Is the AAA experience spending over $200 million on a budget to make a game that could possibly sell well? Or is it, hey, let's maybe reduce that budget a bit, but truly make a game that, where there's healthy compromises here and there. We don't necessarily have to go full blown, full cinematic. Like this thing is basically a playable movie. Because I feel like that's where the disconnect is happening in the industry. And this is why this adjustment has to be done, because it just feels like there is a loss of connection between what consumers want and what developers are making. Because developers are trying to go down this rabbit hole of making these cinematic movies, which yes, people love the first party Sony games. That is true. But we're starting to see that they're not selling the way that they do, because people don't want that. They don't want interactive movies. If they want interactive movies, they might as well just go to the movies and watch a movie. You know what I mean? Like people want video games. They play video games for the gameplay. They play video games for, obviously, yes, a story. But they're not asking for this thing to be like so lifelike and so super realistic. Like, no, like make it look good, but give us the great storytelling, give us the great voice acting, give us the great gameplay that keeps people engaged, that keeps people coming back, that remembers these things for 20, 30, 40 years. You get what I mean? And this is where we're starting to see this reconsolidation period, and where I genuinely believe we will see the biggest change in the video game industry going forward is during this period. And, call me controversial, call me crazy, but I think it's once we start to realize, and once there is an alignment between the companies on what consumers actually want and what they don't want, I feel like that's where we'll start to see a lot of change. And yes, it is a sad reality that these layoffs have to take place. And I know it sounds bad that I'm saying they have to take place, but I think it's just the objective reality is, yes, while I do believe there are other measures that could have been taken care of to help prevent maybe as many, I do believe that, yes, like there are a lot of redundant roles in the workforce that, yes, we probably need to cut down because there's a lot of redundancies. Because again, mergers happen, so you can't have two people in the same role because that's kind of dumb. So, hey, whoever was the best at doing their job, then go from there, you know? But I do believe that this period we will start to see some major shifts in the industry, primarily with budgets getting reeled in heavily. We're starting to see this especially with Sony, with the new leadership, with their new, specifically the new Japanese leadership that has taken place, because after Jim Ryan, now there is a new Japanese president in charge, and we're starting to see a lot of his mindset and what he wants to do, because he, you know, he's a numbers guy, so he's obviously trying to balance out the books and trying to focus on a new direction for Sony to help make them profitable again, but maybe also bring them closer in line with their roots, which is, again, that more targeting things towards the Japanese audience rather than the Western audience, which, you know, that's a whole different conversation to have for another day, but we will have it. But we're starting to see some of these changes. Same thing, Microsoft is starting to open up their game catalog to other platforms because, again, more platforms, more people are buying, and the more people buying, the more sales, more money, more revenue, etc., etc., etc. But again, do I believe there's a crash coming? No. Now, I say that with an asterisk because, again, things could change drastically and we could see like two major publishers just go under. And then, yeah, at that point, it basically means we're in a crash, guys. It's going to happen. But right now, I don't necessarily believe it is a crash. I believe it is mostly a reconsolidation period. I believe that we are starting to see a realignment with what consumers want and what businesses are producing, so that there is now a clear connection, that it's not just, oh, well, I think they want this, but clearly they're not responding well to it. You got what I mean? Like, that's what I'm referring to. And same thing, like over hiring during COVID, overspending, and now setting expectations to a more realistic level instead of those super inflated COVID numbers, because again, those were super inflated numbers because of the time period we were in. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think that no, like we're doomed, or the video game industry is doomed? Or do you think, hey, maybe we're onto something here and maybe this generally is what's probably going to happen? But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Are you happy about what's happening going on, which be kind of worrying some if you were, or hey, there's also some good things to be happy about in this situation, if I'm being honest with you. Whether you think about it or not, yes, there are some good things that are coming from this. We just have to look at it from a different perspective. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I hope you find it useful, informative, and again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. But I love you guys to death. Please continue to be kind and respectful to those around you guys, because the world is a weird place. And don't do anything dumb, guys. Have yourselves a wonderful week and weekend. I know it's spring break right now for people that are on spring break, so I hope you guys get to enjoy your travels. Be safe. Don't do anything stupid that will probably get you in trouble. But if you do, there's grace, there's forgiveness. But just don't be idiots, guys. Don't get yourself in trouble. But love you guys to death, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys.
Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.